The Force had no name for what it felt. In the depths of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, Master Yoda sat in meditation, his ancient eyes closed, his breathing slow and deliberate. The living Force moved around him like a warm current, familiar and constant, whispering the futures of 1,000 battles across 1,000 star systems. The Clone Wars raged beyond the temple's walls. Separatist droid armies pressing against Republic lines on Geonosis, Christophsis, and Ryloth, and the Force carried the weight of every death like stones dropped into still water. Then something impossible happened. The ripple came from everywhere and nowhere. Not darkness, not light, not the cold, creeping absence that preceded Sith manipulation. This was something entirely outside the language of the Force, two simultaneous detonations of energy so fundamentally alien that Yoda's eyes snapped open and he rose from his meditation mat for the first time in 6 hours. He murmured, his three-clawed hand gripping his Jimmer's stick tightly. Something arrives. Something the Force cannot name. Above the planet Geonosis, 12 parsecs from Coruscant, space itself had already made its protest known. The first tier appeared without warning, a horizontal gash in the fabric of real space, bleeding white gold light that Republic sensor arrays initially misidentified as a hyperdrive malfunction. Clone Commander Cody, running tactical drills aboard the Venator-class Star Destroyer Resolute, watched his sensor board go haywire as every proximity alarm triggered simultaneously. The tear widened, expanded, and through it fell a single figure, compact, unassuming, dressed in a plain white bodysuit with a yellow cape that caught the solar wind like a flag, plummeting toward Geonosis at a velocity that should have reduced any human being to vapor against the planet's upper atmosphere. Saitama didn't notice the velocity. He was too busy being annoyed. Again, he said flatly, watching the rust-colored planet rush toward him. He'd been standing in his apartment on Z-City, reaching for the last carton of milk in his refrigerator, when the dimensional collapse had simply swallowed him whole. No warning, no dramatic build-up, just elsewhere. He tucked his cape against his body and let himself fall, expression blank, already calculating how long this detour might take and whether his groceries would still be cold when he got back. He hit the Geonosian upper atmosphere and slowed himself with casual indifference, hovering in the orange-tinted sky above a landscape of rocky spires and separatist construction yards. Below him, hundreds of battle droids moved in formation. Massive foundries churned out chassis and weapons. The air smelled of ionized metal and something older, dust, and the particular dryness of a desert world that had never known rain. Saitama looked at it all with the expression of a man reading a mildly disappointing restaurant menu. Space, probably. The second tear opened 11 seconds later, 3 kilometers above the first, and this one arrived with considerably more fanfare. A column of golden key energy punched through the dimensional barrier like a fist through paper, trailing blue lightning and the concussive shockwave of a Kamehameha wave fired at point-blank range into the rift itself. Goku tumbled through the gap, caught himself midair, with the ease of someone who'd been falling through dimensions since before most planets had names, and assessed his new environment in approximately 1.5 seconds. Rocky desert world, 2 moons, strange metallic structures, armies of white-armored soldiers engaging armies of mechanical ones in the distance. And directly below him, hovering in the atmosphere with his arms crossed in his expression profoundly unimpressed, a bald man in a yellow cape who radiated absolutely nothing in the key-sensing spectrum. Nothing. Zero. A complete absence of detectable energy. Goku floated down until he was level with Saitama, head tilted, black eyes curious. His orange GI was scorched at the shoulders from whatever dimensional energy had grabbed him mid-training, and his spiky hair hadn't quite settled from the transit. "Hey," Goku said. "Hey," Saitama replied. They regarded each other for a moment. Below them, a squadron of Republic LAT gunships banked hard to avoid the 2 hovering figures. Clone troopers pressing their faces to viewports in disbelief. "You're not from here either," Goku said. It wasn't a question. His key sense had mapped every living thing on the planet in the first 3 seconds, and whatever Saitama was. He didn't map. Nope, Saitama said. You? Nope. Goku scratched the back of his head. I was training with Vegeta when something just grabbed me. You feel that? I felt a thing, yeah. On the bridge of the Resolute. Commander Cody had patched the visual feed directly to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. Master Obi-Wan Kenobi stood at the holo projector, watching two figures hover in Geonosis's atmosphere, with the relaxed posture of men, waiting for a transport, while Republic and Separatist forces clashed 3 kilometers below them. Master Yoda, Obi-Wan said carefully, I believe the Force was trying to warn us about something. In the Jedi Temple, Yoda was already moving toward the war room. The Force ripple hadn't faded, it had intensified, spreading outward from Geonosis in concentric waves that every Force sensitive on Coruscant could now feel. But beneath both those signatures, threading through them like ice water, poured into warm, a third presence, ancient, cold, utterly without life. The Night King had not come through one tear. He had come through both of them, riding the dimensional wake of 2 warriors powerful, enough to crack the walls between worlds. Slipping through the gap their arrival had torn in the fabric of real space. And while Saitama looked bored and Goku looked curious and Republic sensors scrambled to categorize 2 anomalous humanoids above Geonosis, the third presence descended on Coruscant. The first sign was the temperature. In the lower levels of Coruscant, the deep city, where light from the surface never reached, and millions of beings lived in perpetual, artificial night, water pipes began to freeze. Then the pipes themselves, then the walls, then the air, and in the frozen silence that followed, the dead began to open their eyes. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The cold came for Coruscant like a secret. It did not announce itself with the drama of a Separatist bombardment or the shriek of TIE fighter engines. It crept. It moved through the lower levels first, level 1313, the deep city, the underbelly of the Republic's gleaming capital, where the permanently dispossessed lived in shadows so thick they had texture. Water vendors found their stock frozen solid in sealed containers. Heating units in cheap apartments sputtered and died without explanation. A Rodian spice dealer in the Crimson Corridor stepped outside his stall to investigate a strange silence and found the entire alleyway coated in black ice, the vapor of his breath crystallizing before it left his lips. Then he saw the shapes moving at the far end of the corridor and had exactly 2 seconds to understand what they were before he stopped being alive. The Night King walked through the lower city like winter given purpose. He was tall, taller than any human, his pale blue skin etched with ancient markings that pulsed faintly in the dark, his eyes burning with cold white fire. He wore no armor that any species in the galaxy would recognize. He carried no weapon. He did not need one. Behind him, spreading outward through the labyrinthine corridors of Coruscant's deep levels, his army moved in perfect, terrible silence. The dead of 100 worlds, dragged through the same dimensional rift his own passage had widened, their eyes carrying that same white fire, their movements mechanical and absolute. But here, in this galaxy, his power found new material to work with. Coruscant's lower levels were not empty. They never were. Millions of beings lived beneath the surface city, humans, Twi'leks, Zobrix, Ugnaughts, Gran, and dozens of other species, crammed into the forgotten infrastructure of a planet that had been building upward for millennia. The Night King walked among them and raised his arms. And the dead rose. And then there were more dead. And then the army was larger than it had been a minute before. And the cold kept spreading upward, through the cities, ventilation shafts and maintenance, corridors and turbolift, columns like a disease moving through blood. The first distress signal reached the Jedi Temple 40 minutes after Saitama and Goku had appeared above Geonosis. Master Mace Windu received it personally. He stood at the center of the war room, holographic maps of Coruscant rotating around him, red indicators multiplying across the lower-level grid, with a speed that made experienced clone intelligence officers go pale. The signals were confused, fragmented, contradictory, reports of extreme cold in sealed environments, communications cutting out sector by sector, clone security patrols in the lower levels going dark, without so much as a distress call. It's not a separatist attack, said Captain Rex, studying the pattern on his datapad. No energy signatures, no ship movement, no droids. Whatever this is, it came from inside the city. Not inside, Windus said quietly. He could feel it now through the force, not darkness exactly, but the absolute negation of the living force, like pressing your hand against a transparisteel window and feeling the cold of deep space. On the other side, below it, he reached out further with his senses, probing carefully, and immediately wished he hadn't. The absence was enormous, spreading, and within it, threading through the dead zones like roots through soil, were presences that had once been alive, beings he could no longer feel through the force because they were no longer connected to it, cut off, severed from the living current entirely, not dead in the way of natural death, where a presence simply faded from the force like a candle going out, dead in the way of something that should not be. "Get me Yoda," Windus said, "and get me a battalion of the 501st in full cold weather gear." Now, on Geonosis, the conversation between Saitama and Goku had reached its natural limit, which for Saitama was approximately 4 exchanges, and for Goku was roughly the moment he sensed something catastrophically wrong emanating from the direction of the distant gleaming planet, visible as a bright point of light against the stars. "Something's wrong up there," Goku said, eyes narrowing, his key sense stretching across the void with the practiced ease of someone who had sensed threats across planetary distances since his 20s. What he felt made his jaw tighten. Not evil in the way of Frisia, or Cell, or Beerus on a bad day. Something colder and more fundamental. The absence of life energy where life energy should be, spreading like a stain. "A lot of people are dying. Fast." Saitama looked in the same direction. He couldn't sense ki. He couldn't feel the force, but he had been a hero long enough to recognize the particular quality of silence that meant people needed help. That the main planet? The city one? Yeah. Goku was already powering up, golden light erupting around him as Super Saiyan energy crackled across his skin, his hair flaring upward. The shockwave rolled outward and flipped 3 Republic gunships onto their sides. He grabbed them with a casual burst of telekinesis, not force, just key manipulation, and righted them before their pilots had finished screaming. "Sorry about that." Saitama was already moving. No power-up, no transformation, no dramatic speech. He simply decided to go and went, crossing the distance from Geonosis's upper atmosphere to orbital velocity in the time it took Goku to finish apologizing to the gunship pilots. They arrived above Coruscant together, which was when they both saw it. The upper city was still gleaming. The Senate District, the Jedi Temple, the wealthy upper-level arcologies, all of it intact, lit against the darkness of space like a jewel. But rising from the ventilation towers and maintenance shafts of the lower levels, visible even from orbit, was a column of unnatural cold, a white mist that poured upward through every surface opening in a broad sector of the city. And within that mist, if you looked carefully, shapes moved in terrible unison. "How many you think?" Saitama asked. Goku's eyes scanned the expanding dead zone below. His expression was serious in a way that most beings who'd faced him would have found immediately alarming. "Hundreds of thousands, maybe more. And whatever's leading them," he paused, "it doesn't have a life force at all. It's like trying to sense a hole." In the Jedi Temple, every force sensitive in the building felt Goku's Super Saiyan transformation simultaneously, a blast of ki energy so enormous it registered in the force like a second sun, briefly igniting in low orbit. Youngling classes stopped mid-lesson. Knights broke meditation. Padawans grabbed their lightsabers on pure instinct. Master Yoda stood at the temple's highest window and looked up at the 2 figures descending toward the city, one blazing with golden fire, one utterly invisible to the Force, and made a decision that his 900 years of experience told him was either very wise or catastrophically wrong. "Meet them, we must," he said, "before the cold reaches the temple steps." The 501st Legion was already moving into the lower levels when the first whites reached the surface. Captain Rex watched his thermal scanner as the temperature in Sector 7 dropped 40 degrees in 90 seconds and said, in the measured tone of a man who had fought battle droids, separatist superweapons, and rogue Jedi. I have a very bad feeling about this. He had no idea. The first white came through a maintenance hatch on level 5 of the Senate District. It had been a Coruscant Security Force officer 20 minutes ago, a human male, 12 years on the Force. Commendations for bravery during the Zyro the Hutt incident. A family in the mid-levels. None of that remained. What climbed through the hatch, wore his armor, and moved in his body but looked through his eyes with white fire. And when the two Senate Guard troopers at the corridor checkpoint raised their weapons and demanded identification, it walked through their blaster bolts, without slowing, and killed them both with its bare hands before they finished the sentence. Then they rose too. Then there were three. Captain Rex heard the alert from Sector 7 Command and rerouted 2 squads to intercept. His voice crisp and professional over the comm, even as his tactical mind processed the implications of what the scanner data was telling him. Blaster fire wasn't stopping them. Stun settings achieved nothing. Direct hits to center mass, the kind of shots that dropped battle droids and separatist soldiers, reliably registered on the whites like thrown pebbles. One clone trooper in Squad 7 had emptied an entire power pack into a white at point-blank range and watched it keep walking. Aim for the head, Rex ordered, recalling the fragmented intelligence reports from the lower levels. And don't let them touch you. Whatever this is, it spreads through contact. It was sound tactical advice. It helped, marginally. But for every white they put down, the Night King, still moving silently through the deep city, ascending gradually through maintenance corridors that no Senate security map had updated in 40 years, raised 3 more from the freshly dead, and the mathematics of the situation were not favorable to the Republic. Mace Windu reached level 5 18 minutes after the first breach, his purple lightsaber already ignited, the force flowing through him in the controlled aggressive current of Vapad. 2 Jedi Knights flanked him, Aayla Secura and Kit Fisto, both experienced battlefield commanders, both already reaching outward with their senses to map the enemy. What they found stopped all 3 of them mid-stride. I can't feel them, Aayla said, her blue leku tightening against her shoulders in the Twi'lek expression of deep unease. They're right there. I can see them, but in the Force they're just absent. Like trying to fight shadows, Kit Fisto agreed, his smooth face unusually grim. Windu didn't waste time on philosophical assessment. He stepped forward and drove his blade through the nearest white, a former maintenance worker still, carrying his Hydra spanner, and watched it drop. Lightsaber kills them. Move. It was true. The plasma blade, hot enough to cut through blast doors and Mandalorian iron, severed the connection that animated them with permanent finality. But there were hundreds now on level 5 alone, and hundreds more pressing up from below. And even 3 Jedi moving at full combat capacity could only cover so much ground. The situation on level 5 was what Goku landed into. He came down through a transparisteel skylight at roughly the speed of a proton torpedo, pulling his velocity back at the last possible moment, so that his landing cracked the permacrete floor in a 3-meter radius, but didn't collapse the structure entirely. The blast of displaced air knocked a dozen whites off their feet. Windu spun, lightsaber raised, the Force screaming threat at the golden-haired figure rising from the impact crater, and then paused. Because whatever this being was, the Force around him was not dark. It was blazing, warm, almost searingly alive. You're fighting them wrong, Goku said, observing the situation with the rapid tactical assessment of someone who'd been in enough wars to read a battlefield in seconds. Whites were rising faster than the 3 Jedi could put them down. Clone troopers were being pushed back on 3 sides. The cold was intensifying. His breath was misting now, even in Super Saiyan form. You're letting them set the pace. And you are? Windu asked, in the particular tone he reserved for beings who appeared from nowhere, during crises and immediately offered tactical criticism. Goku. He powered up another level, the golden aura brightening, and the temperature in the corridor rose 15 degrees in response. I'll push them back. You find the source. He didn't wait for Windu's approval, because Goku had never fully grasped the concept of waiting for approval when people were dying. He moved into the crowd of whites at Super Saiyan speed, which on level 5 of the Coruscant Senate District, looked like a golden blur that hit with the force of a turbo laser and left trails of afterimage. Scorched into the walls. Whites flew. Whites shattered against walls and ceilings. Whites that had been cloned. Troopers and Senate guards and maintenance. Workers an hour ago were launched through interior walls with the casual efficiency of someone who had once punched a planet-destroying energy beam. Back at its source, they rose again. Every single one. Goku stopped, hovering above the corridor, and watched a white he had hit hard enough to embed in a durasteel wall pull itself free, reform, and turn its white fire eyes back toward him. He hit it again. It rose again. He looked at his fist, then at the white, with an expression of genuine scientific curiosity rapidly shading into concern. Huh, he said. That's new. 6 blocks away and 40 levels up, Saitama landed on the Senate District's open plaza, with a sound like a distant artillery strike, and immediately drew every eye in the area. The plaza was chaos. Civilians fleeing upward through emergency evacuation tubes. Senate Guard units forming a perimeter that the advancing white column was leisurely dismantling. A pair of Jedi Padawans, barely older than teenagers, their faces tight with the effort of maintaining battle composure, holding a choke, point at the plaza's north entrance, with green and blue blades moving in the precise defensive patterns their masters had drilled into them for years. Saitama watched a white take a lightsaber through the shoulder, barely register it, and backhand a Padawan into a fountain. He walked over, picked the Padawan up by the back of her robe, set her on her feet, and then turned to face approximately 300 whites advancing across the plaza. He sighed, the particular sigh of a man who had been promised a worthy challenge for 3 years and kept receiving variations on the same disappointment. He punched the front rank. The shockwave from a Saitama punch, even a casual one, even one thrown with perhaps 15% of the effort he used against opponents he considered worth the attention, carried enough kinetic force to rearrange geography. In the open plaza, it manifested as a concentrated wall of displaced air that hit the white column like a tidal wave, sending 300 undead bodies tumbling backward in a cascade, crashing into each other, into walls, into the level below through plaza grading that simply gave way under the impact. The plaza was clear. The 2 Padawans stared at him. Saitama turned around, already looking bored. The one he'd picked up, a Togruta girl with orange and white montrals and eyes wide, enough to reflect the entire plaza, was gripping her lightsaber so hard her knuckles had gone pale. You okay? Saitama asked. She made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Good. He looked at the empty plaza, then at the city stretching in every direction, then at the column of cold mist still rising from the lower levels. Where's the thing controlling these guys? We don't know, the other Padawan managed. Human boy, maybe 16, his braids slightly singed. Master Windu is looking for it. Okay. Saitama put his hands in his pockets. Guess I'll find it then. He walked toward the mist column with the energy of a man going to check his mail. Behind him, the whites he had knocked into the level below were already pulling themselves back up through the grating. And in the deep city, moving upward with patient inevitability, the Night King tilted his head slightly, the first gesture he had made that wasn't functional, the first thing that suggested something. Behind those burning eyes that might have been recognition, as though he had felt, for the first time since crossing between worlds, something in this galaxy that warranted his direct attention. Not Goku, blazing with ki energy. Not the Jedi, humming with their force connection. The one who carried nothing. The one the cold could not read. The one that registered to whatever sense the Night King used to map his battlefield as an absolute blank, as absent from his perception as his whites were absent from the Force. He had faced many opponents in the endless winter of his existence. He had never faced one he could not see. For the first time in longer than the Republic had existed, the Night King changed his route. The 501st Legion learned 3 things in the first hour of the Battle of Coruscant. The first thing they learned was that blasters worked, but only if you destroyed the head completely, a precise shot that clone troopers, trained for battlefield efficiency against battle droids, had to consciously retrain themselves to execute under fire. The second thing they learned was that the cold was not incidental. It was tactical. The Night King's army advanced fastest through sealed corridors and enclosed spaces where the temperature dropped quickest, slowing clone reaction times, fogging helmet visors, freezing the lubricant in blaster mechanisms after sustained exposure. Rex had already lost 4 troopers to weapons malfunction in the worst of it. The third thing, the thing that Rex communicated to Windu in a terse, 3-sentence battlefield report that the Jedi Master read twice before accepting, was that their casualties were not staying down. Every clone who fell in the cold zones rose within 4 minutes. Rex had been forced to issue an order that no commander in the Republic military had ever given before, and that the GAR's entire operational doctrine had no framework for. If a brother goes down in a cold zone and doesn't respond to comms within 90 seconds, he is no longer a brother. Respond accordingly. The clones obeyed because they were trained to obey, and because Rex delivered the order in the same measured tone he used for all orders, and because falling apart was not something the 501st did, but the weight of it moved through the battalion like the cold itself, invisible, pervasive, and deeply wrong. Goku had figured out the problem within his first 10 minutes of combat. Physical destruction didn't hold. Ki blasts didn't hold. Even his most precise attacks, single-finger strikes calibrated to shatter bone without collateral damage, techniques Piccolo had beaten into him during training sessions that had left craters in Kami's lookout, achieved temporary results at best. The whites simply reassembled, reanimated, returned. The connection animating them ran deeper than physical form, and until that connection was severed at its source, he was essentially rearranging furniture in a burning building. He found Windu on level 8, the Jedi Master moving through a corridor of fallen whites with his purple blade, a constant sweep of controlled violence. Aayla Secura covering his left flank, Kit Fisto holding the rear. They had developed an efficient rhythm, 2 strikes to immobilize, 1 precise cut to the head, move on, but the corridor behind them was already showing movement again. As whites further back began to stir, the source, Goku said, falling into step beside Windu without ceremony. We have to find whatever's controlling them and take it out. Destroying them one by one isn't working. We are aware, Windu said, in the tone of a man who did not need this explained to him. Your force, can you track it? It doesn't exist in the force. Windu's jaw tightened. Whatever leads this army, it carries no presence I can follow. I have been attempting for 40 minutes. Goku was quiet for a moment, his key sense sweeping outward in expanding circles, mapping the city's life energy the way a sonar pulse maps ocean floor. Millions of presences, the warm, chaotic tangle of a city planet's population, the bright, disciplined signatures of Jedi, the steady, trained rhythms of clone troopers, and threading through all of it, spreading like frost across glass, the expanding zones of absolute nothing. But nothing was not invisible to key sense in the way it was invisible to the Force. Nothing had a shape, and the shape had a center. I can find it, Goku said. It's below us. Still moving up, but slower now, like it changed direction recently. He frowned. It's heading for something specific. Someone specific. Windu looked at him sharply. What? I don't know who. But whatever's leading this army, it turned. About 20 minutes ago. It's not coming for the Jedi Temple anymore. Goku pointed through the floor. It's heading for the Plaza sector. In the Plaza sector, Saitama had descended 4 levels into the maintenance infrastructure and was having the most interesting experience he'd had in years, which still wasn't particularly interesting, but was at least different from his usual routine of hitting things until they stopped. The whites down here were different, denser, moving, with slightly more coordination than the ones above, clustering in formations that suggested something more than simple reanimation instinct. The corridors were so cold that frost formed on his suit, which didn't bother him, because nothing bothered him physically, and the darkness was near total. The only illumination coming from the white fire in dead eyes and the faint bioluminescence of frozen pipe condensation. Saitama walked through them, not fought through them. Walked. When they got in his way, he moved them, not with the explosive casual violence he'd used in the plaza, but with the patient physical economy of a man clearing a path, setting each one aside with the minimum force required. He was thinking, or doing the thing that passed for thinking in Saitama. which was a kind of wordless attentiveness that his surface, boredom perpetually obscured. The whites weren't reacting to him the way they reacted to everyone else. Up above, he'd seen them drive relentlessly toward Jedi and clone troopers, ignoring pain, ignoring damage, advancing with the singularity of purpose that made them so dangerous in enclosed spaces. Down here, the ones he'd passed were still turning to follow him. They weren't ignoring him, but there was something different in their behavior. A hesitation, almost a recalibration, as though whatever sensed the controlling intelligence used to direct them was struggling to get a proper lock on his position. He remembered what the Togruta Padawan had said, trying to describe it later to her master. It was like he was walking through fog that couldn't figure out what shape he was. Saitama just thought they seemed confused. He found confused enemies mildly more interesting than confident ones. He was 4 levels down, in a corridor so cold the air tasted of ice. When the Night King stepped out of the darkness ahead of him, they regarded each other across 30 meters of frozen corridor. The Night King was larger than Saitama had expected, not enormous. Not the scale of the monsters he occasionally fought at home, but possessed of a presence that filled the space around him in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. The white fire in his eyes moved differently than it did in his whites, more complex, more deliberate, like intelligence rather than simple direction. The markings on his pale skin pulsed slowly. Behind him, Saitama could see hundreds of whites filling the corridor from wall to wall, their combined breath creating a white fog that moved in the cold air like something alive. The Night King raised his hand. Every white in the corridor oriented towards Saitama simultaneously, with the precision of a targeting system achieving lock. Saitama put his hands in his pockets. "So you're the one running this," he said. Not a question. He studied the Night King with the same patient attentiveness he'd shown for the last 20 minutes. "You turned around and came, looking for me specifically." He tilted his head slightly. "Why?" The Night King did not answer. Because the Night King never answered. Because words were a technology of the living and he had left that country behind a long time ago. But something moved in those burning eyes. Something that was not quite curiosity and not quite calculation, but lived in the territory between them. He had crossed between worlds pursuing the wake of 2 impossible powers. He had mapped this new galaxy's dead with the efficiency of long practice, finding it generous beyond any world he'd previously walked. So many beings, so many who fell so easily. Such remarkable armies waiting in every corridor and chamber. The blazing one, the one who hit like a collapsing star and burned with golden fire. He understood. Power he could measure was power he could plan around. But this one, this blank, this absence that walked and punched and breathed and killed his whites with the casual efficiency of someone doing household chores, who registered to every sense he possessed as simply not there, who could not be read or mapped or predicted because there was nothing to read or map or predict from. He raised his other hand, and from the ceiling, from the walls, from every frozen surface in the corridor, the dead came. Not just the whites in the corridor. Whites from 4 levels up began moving downward. Whites from 6 levels down began moving up. The entire army in this sector of the city reorienting toward one location with the coordinated precision of a military mind that had been practicing this for longer than most civilizations had been practicing. Agriculture. 600 whites converged on one corridor for one target. Saitama looked at the ceiling as the first of them came, through the ventilation ducts above him, then at the walls as more tore through the permacrete, then at the floor as grating buckled upward under the pressure of the dead below. For the first time in a long time, possibly the first time since a particular fight with an alien overlord on a crumbling planet, something that was not quite excitement moved across his face. He cracked his knuckles. Above them all, Goku felt the mass key signature of 600 dead zones converging on a single point and understood immediately what was happening. He was through the floor before the understanding finished forming, burning downward through 4 levels of permacrete with a sustained key blast, leaving a tunnel of scorched Republic infrastructure behind him, arriving at level 4 in a cascade of debris and golden light just in time to see the corridor walls explode inward as the White Army made its final push. And in the center of it all, Saitama stood across from the Night King. And the Night King raised his arm for the command that would send everything at once. And Goku landed between them with his hands raised and his eyes moving between the two, with the rapid assessment of someone who had just realized this situation was significantly more complicated than a simple rescue. Wait, Goku said. To both of them. Neither listened. The corridor became a war in the time it takes a star to blink. Saitama moved first. Because Saitama always moved first when things finally became interesting. And the White Army crashed into him like a breaking wave against a mountain. 600 undead bodies, clone troopers, Senate guards, maintenance workers, beings from a dozen species who had simply been in the wrong corridor at the wrong hour, hit him from every direction simultaneously. And the result was not what the Night King had intended. The result was a shockwave, a contained, concentrated detonation of kinetic force that began at Saitama's center and expanded outward in a perfect sphere, and every white within 15 meters ceased to be a problem in the structural sense, redistributed across walls and ceiling and floor with the thoroughness of someone who had once accidentally destroyed a mountain range while warming up. The corridor held, barely. Goku had thrown up a key barrier in the same instant, not to protect himself, but to keep the blast from taking out the 4 load-bearing columns that were currently the only thing preventing level 3 from becoming level 4. The barrier cost him focus and position, and 3 whites who had been outside the shockwave radius hit him from behind with the full coordinated weight of the Night King's direction, cold hands finding the gaps between his GI and his skin, the touch of them carrying a chill that even Super Saiyan energy couldn't immediately counter. He felt it, not pain exactly, but wrongness. A pulling sensation, like something reaching for the warmth at his core and finding it vast, but not infinite. He broke free with a burst of ki that flash froze the 3 whites solid, then shattered them with a single open palm strike, and came up to find the corridor, temporarily clear and Saitama standing at its center, looking at his own hands with an expression of mild philosophical consideration. They keep getting up, Saitama said. Not if you destroy the head completely, Goku said, landing beside him. His breath misted despite the Super Saiyan aura. The cold down here was extraordinary, a living thing. Purposeful, pressing against his energy like a constant drain. But there's too many. We need to take out the one controlling them. Yeah, Saitama said. I know. They both looked at the Night King, who stood at the far end of the corridor exactly where he had stood before the army's charge, unchanged, unmoved, regarding them both with those burning white eyes and the particular stillness of something that had learned patience during an age when the concept of patience was still new. He raised his arm again. The fallen whites began to stir. How do we kill something that doesn't exist in any energy spectrum I can sense? Goku asked, not panicked, genuinely curious, the way he got curious about strong opponents. Filing information with the intensity of a fighter who'd learned that understanding an enemy was the first step to beating them. You hit it until it stops, Saitama said. I don't think it's that simple. It's always that simple. Saitama paused. The question is whether you're hitting it hard enough. Goku looked at him, really looked, for the first time since they'd met above Geonosis, with the full attention of someone whose key sense was the most refined instrument he possessed. He had been trying to read Saitama since their first meeting and getting nothing. The same void he got from the Night King and his whites, and had filed it as a limitation of dimensional travel interfering with his senses. But it wasn't that. He knew, with the absolute certainty of a fighter, who had stood across from Beerus and Jiren and Broly and learned to read threat levels the way ordinary people read weather, that the bald man standing next to him in the frozen corridor with his hands in his pockets was the most dangerous thing in this galaxy right now. Not the Night King, not his 600 whites rising again from the permacrete, not Darth Sidious operating in the shadows above them or Count Dooku commanding separatist fleets across 1,000 systems. This man, this profoundly bored, deeply unimpressive-looking man who punched things. How strong are you? Goku asked. Saitama considered the question with the seriousness it probably didn't deserve. From his perspective, I don't know, he said. I stopped being able to measure it a while ago. Goku was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then he nodded, with the particular nod of someone who had received an answer they recognized from personal experience and found it both concerning and deeply exciting. Okay, he said, here's what we do. What they did was not elegant. It was not the coordinated tactical masterpiece that Mace Windu, arriving at level 4 via a different route with Ayla Secura and the remains of 2 clone squads, would have preferred. It was not the kind of plan that got written up in Republic military doctrine or Jedi Council strategic archives. What it was fast. Goku went first, Ultra Instinct, the full transformation, silver hair and silver eyes and the aura of someone who had briefly touched the movement of gods and learned to inhabit it. He moved through the White Army at a speed that the Night King's tactical intelligence could track, but not respond to quickly enough. Not because the Night King was slow, but because Ultra Instinct Goku was operating at a level where slowness was a relative concept. Every white he passed ceased to function. Precise, calibrated destruction, each strike targeted to the head with the efficiency of 10,000 hours of combat refinement, clearing a path through 600 bodies in the time it took Captain Rex 3 levels above to reload his DC-17. The Night King watched this and did what he had done in every battle he had ever fought. He raised the dead as fast as they fell, maintaining his army through the arithmetic of resurrection, certain in the way of something that had never lost that. Attrition would eventually tell. He had not accounted for the blank. Saitama walked the path Goku had cleared, not ran, walked. The whites that Goku hadn't reached turned toward him and crashed against him and fell and rose and fell again in the time it took him to cross the corridor, because he wasn't stopping for them, because they weren't the point. His eyes were on the Night King, had been on the Night King since the corridor had first gone quiet enough to see him clearly. The Night King felt him coming in the only way he could feel this one, not through the army's shared perception, not through the cold, spreading map of the space around him, but through the simple animal sense of proximity, the blank getting closer, the unreadable thing approaching, with the inevitability of something that couldn't be turned, couldn't be redirected, couldn't be fed into the army and dissolved. For the first time, the Night King moved toward an opponent rather than directing his army to intercept. He met Saitama 10 meters from the point where Goku was, systematically dismantling the rear guard. And the first exchange was the Night King's hand closing around Saitama's fist as the punch came in, a catch, the kind of move that had shattered the weapons of every warrior who had ever raised one against him, an act of demonstration as much as defense, an announcement in the language of violence that said, I have seen this coming, and I am beyond it. Saitama's fist stopped. For perhaps a half-second, the Night King's burning eyes showed nothing. His grip was absolute. The cold radiating from his hand was the cold of the furthest reaches of a world that had forgotten warmth. And where it touched Saitama's skin it found no purchase, no nerve endings to seize, no physiology that the cold could inform with its usual message of shut down and surrender. Saitama looked at the hand holding his fist, then at the Night King's face. He said, and pushed. Not a punch, a push. The distinction was meaningful because a punch from Saitama was an event. Kinetic, directional, targeted. What he gave the Night King was simply the force behind the punch, applied without the punch's discipline. A raw transfer of energy so far beyond anything the corridor had been engineered to contain, that the walls didn't so much break as decide to be somewhere else. The Night King traveled the length of the corridor, through the wall at its end, through the structural column beyond that wall, through the foundation stratum of level 4, and into the bedrock of Coruscant itself, leaving behind a tunnel of destroyed infrastructure and, at its far end, a crater that steamed in the cold air. The whites stopped, every single one, simultaneously. In every corridor on every level where they had been advancing, stopped. Rex, reloading on level 7, found 3 whites frozen mid-stride around him like obscene statuary. Windu, cutting through a cluster on level 6, felt the force snap back into clarity like a viewport shattering inward. The dead zones simply ceasing, the living force rushing back through the corridors with the disorienting relief of a held breath finally released. Then Goku was gone, instant transmission, 2 fingers to his forehead, locking onto the key signature of the impact, and reappeared in the crater beside the Night King before. The dust had settled. What he found made him go still. The Night King was rising. Slowly, far slower than his whites rose. The movement labored in a way that suggested even he had limits, but rising. The markings on his skin were dark, not pulsing. The white fire in his eyes had dimmed to embers. He pushed himself upright with the deliberate effort of something that had been genuinely, substantially hurt for perhaps the first time in its existence, and looked at Goku with those dimming eyes. And something moved through them that was complex enough that Goku, who had faced gods and universe, destroyers, and the embodiment of a wish for endless conflict, had no framework to interpret it. He raised his hand. The gesture was the same one he used to raise his dead. But no whites rose. They were too far, too scattered. The connection interrupted by whatever Saitama had done to the signal at its source. Goku powered down to base form, stood across from the Night King in the crater, in the cold that was already, barely, beginning to ease. Reached out with his key sense. Found the same void he'd found before, but smaller now. Contained. "I don't think you can win this one," Goku said. Not tauntingly. Simply, the way he said things to opponents he respected, or at least acknowledged. The Night King looked at him for a long moment. The white fire steadied slightly, not the blazing command of before, but present, aware. Then he lowered his hand. Above them, Saitama dropped into the crater with the casual landing of someone stepping off a curb. He looked at the Night King, looked at Goku, looked at the gradually warming air around them. "Did it work?" he asked. "I think so," Goku said. "But I don't know if he's not dead," Saitama said. "I didn't punch him that hard." Goku stared at him. "I almost never punch things that hard," Saitama clarified, in a tone that communicated this was not a boast, but simply a logistical observation, and that he found the distinction privately somewhat depressing. From the crater's edge, Mace Windu looked down at the two beings who had just broken the Night King's army in the span of a single section's worth of fighting, at the ancient entity sitting in the rubble looking diminished and almost bewildered, at the tunnel punched through 3 levels of Coruscant's infrastructure, and at the slowly returning warmth of a city planet remembering what it meant to be alive. He ignited his lightsaber. "Now," he said, "we finish it." The Battle of Coruscant ended not with an explosion or a final, dramatic clash of impossible powers, but with a moment of profound, galaxy-altering stillness. Mace Windu descended into the crater with his purple blade ignited, Aayla Secura and Kit Fisto flanking him, the force flowing through all 3 Jedi with the clarity that had returned the moment. The Night King's grip on the city's dead had faltered. The ancient entity sat in the rubble, diminished but not destroyed, its white fire eyes tracking each approaching figure with the patient intelligence of something that had survived longer than most civilizations had lasted. Goku stood aside. This felt right. Not his kill, not his galaxy, not his war to finish. Saitama stood aside for a different reason. He was checking his suit for damage. Windu's strike was precise, decisive, and permanent. The Force guided it with the certainty of 900 generations of Jedi, knowledge meeting one absolute moment of necessity. The white fire went out. The cold left Coruscant like a tide going out, not gradually, but completely. All at once, as though the planet itself exhaled. In the silence that followed, Rex counted his brothers. The number was not good. The 501st would carry this battle in their bones for whatever remained of the war. And the order Rex had been forced to give, the order no commander should give, would follow him into his nightmares with the persistence of things that are true and terrible simultaneously. The Jedi Council convened within the hour. Yoda sat at the center, studying the holographic reports with his ancient eyes, carrying a weight that even 9 centuries hadn't fully prepared him for. "Seen much? I have," he said quietly. "But this, beyond the Force's knowing, it was a reminder, perhaps, that the galaxy is larger than even our understanding." Goku was offered a seat before the council. He declined politely and sat on the floor, which several Jedi Masters found either deeply humble or deeply disrespectful depending on their personal philosophy. Saitama was offered the same seat. He asked if there was food. There was a long diplomatic pause, after which someone sent for ration packs. Neither man could be returned to their home dimension. The tears that had brought them through had collapsed, sealed by the night, King's death, and the settling of whatever dimensional instability had created them. They were, at least temporarily, stranded in a galaxy far, far away, in the middle of a war that was not theirs, surrounded by people who could not decide if they were heroes, threats, or simply inexplicable. Goku found this exciting. The galaxy was enormous and full of fighters, and he hadn't even begun to explore it. Saitama found it acceptable. At least the enemies here occasionally surprised him. And in the deep levels of Coruscant, in the frozen corridors where the battle had been decided, the frost slowly melted from the walls and the lights came back on in the city. Remembered itself, imperfect, complicated, beautiful, alive. The dead stayed dead. The force sang quietly through every living thing on the planet, warm and constant, doing what it had always done, binding everything together, even things it couldn't name. May the force be with you.